Hey guys, it is Jen from Farpoint Farms. Today we're going to be making a small little batch of salsa. It is tomato season, so I'm trying to preserve these the best way I can. I've already done some pickled tomatoes. I've already done some tomato like pasta sauce for the year. So today is going to be the time that we're going to go ahead and do some salsa. So I've got some of the items here that we're going to need. I've got some fresh tomatoes. I've got some fresh peppers, and then I've got an onion. All these came from the garden. So I just want to go ahead and make sure that I'm able to preserve them. For this recipe, which I will have linked in the description below, calls for some tomato paste. It calls for some cider vinegar. For added extra flavor, I like to go ahead and add a little bit of lime juice. Just kind of give that nice limey flavor to it. And then some garlic, because every recipe is complete with garlic. And we're going to use some canning jars. I've got some canning lids, the rings. Another way that you can, if you don't want to add lime juice, you can add a little bit of citric acid. And that acidity is just to make sure that when you can it is done canned safely, so you don't have to worry about any bacteria, botulism, any of that good stuff that might potentially kill you. And then I've just got my little water bath canner here and some of the accessories that came with it. These water bath canners you can get very inexpensively on online, Amazon, that sort of place, even though I'm not a huge fan of Amazon. But if you don't have a water bath canner, you can just use like a large stock pot in order to make this happen. Here's a picture of the recipe that we're going to be using. This is just going to be like just a regular salsa. There's a lot of different variations that you can use, but this one comes out really well. The only thing that I don't add that is in here, this one calls for some cilantro. Not a huge fan of cilantro, so I find that if I leave it out, I don't really miss it. And this is out of the book, which is The Ball Home Preserving. This is actually a gift from my mother-in-law, so thank you very much. Lots of different recipes in here, just a great little book. There's other recipes that you can get online if you choose to. There's different sites that we can kind of play with it. The only thing that I am going to recommend that is if you are going to play with the recipes at all, just try to pare them down. There are certain things that are going to be in here that will make sure that they are canned safely. So make sure that you don't vary from the recipe too much, because it can change the acidity level. And if you're not careful, you could end up either where it will spoil for you, or you could potentially make somebody very, very sick. When you're filling your water bath canner, you want to make sure that you have enough water in there. One, because there will be some evaporation because it will be boiling for quite a long time depending on the recipe. You also want to make sure that you're putting enough water in here so when you put all your jars in, it is covered with at least 1 to 2 inches of water. Again, that will help with the evaporation. You also want to make sure that it's fully submerged. Again, just to make sure that these things are processed safely. There's nothing worse than having something spoil when you've done all this time and effort to go ahead and try to save your what you're growing for the season. Another really big important part of canning is to make sure everything is sanitized 100% correctly. These jars, what I do, even though they were already clean, I went ahead and I washed them again in nice hot soapy water. And I'm going to go ahead and sterilize these jars by putting them in the oven for about 150 to 200 degrees. There's some people that will say 150 is good enough. Some people will say 200 degrees is what you need. Some people say 200 degrees is too much. And other people will take these jars and boil them into, dip them into the hot boiling water to sanitize them as well. One, getting them up to temperature is to make sure that they are sanitized properly. The other part, the salsa that we're going to add in there, is going to be hot. So we want to make sure that these jars are closer in temperature so we don't have any accidental breakage. Right now I've got my jars in the oven. I've got it set for 175 degrees. And I will usually keep these in here while I'm processing everything. It usually turns out to being about, I don't know, 20-30 minutes. When you're canning, just be prepared that it does take a really long time from start to finish, and there is a lot of cleanup. So if you're in a hurry, canning, that may not be the best time to go ahead and can. Start to finish, this will probably take me about an hour and a half or so. If I'm doing something a little bit more intensive, such as like doing like peach jam or something like that, that can take up to about 3.5 hours to do start to finish, from picking the peaches to go ahead and peeling them, getting them chopped up, letting everything cook down, and then the canning time. Alright, for making this salsa, it is best to go ahead and take the skins off these tomatoes. Otherwise you're going to get these really chewy bits in it. And what we're going to do is, for the tomatoes, I have done little slits on the bottom of it. And then we are going to put it in boiling water, maybe 20 seconds give or take. And then we're going to drop it immediately into ice water. And what that's going to do is it's going to loosen up the skins, and the skins are going to pull right off. So I can go ahead and make the salsa without having those nasty little skins. You can keep those skins and you can dehydrate them and then crush them up, and that will make some really good tomato powder. That's good for adding into soups, all that kind of stuff. And the peppers that I have today, these are some of the ones that we got from the garden this morning. Got some bell peppers. There's these little guys right here. I didn't have a lot of peppers. I kind of forgot to grab more at the store. So we're just going to make a small little batch here just because I don't have a whole lot. It's tomato season and the tomatoes are coming in droves. So this will just be one little batch that I make today. Dropping just one tomato in here. Like I said, we're going to keep this in here for maybe 20 seconds, just enough to kind of loosen up that skin. We'll drop it in that ice bath to go ahead and just stop the cooking on it. And I don't know if you can tell, but the skins are already starting to peel off. That's exactly how long you need to have it in there. I say 20 seconds, that may have only been 10. Sometimes other tomatoes will take a little bit longer. Go ahead and get that in there. Stop that cooking. Because again, I want fresh salsa. I do not want to make tomato sauce. And again, you can see those skins are literally just peeling right off. And you can save those skins. Like I said, you go ahead and make some tomato powder out of them if you dehydrate them. These are actually going to go to our chickens because they are a huge fan of tomato skins. So again, nothing will go to waste here. Here's a picture of that tomato, nice and smooth. The skins are off. You can see the skins are right here. And to do this batch of tomatoes, this will only take me maybe 3 or 4 minutes to go ahead and get the skins off everything. And this is just going to be one step in there as far as how to prepare all the items for it. And I'm going to have a more detailed directions and recipe in the comment boxes for you guys. So this recipe is going to call for these tomatoes to be coarsely chopped. You can either do that by hand, or if you have a food processor, you can just kind of pulse them a few times to go ahead and get them into much smaller pieces. Obviously, like these stem parts are going to go ahead and have to get cut off. When you're growing tomatoes and there's any little parts that may have had like a small little spot that has gone bad, or if you have critters that may have taken a small little bite like birds, you can still use those tomatoes. You just have to go ahead and cut off any parts that may have been bad. Some people choose not to do this, but that's how they did preserving a long time ago. Nothing went to waste. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, if any ones that have blemishes or you're just not sure about, go ahead and discard those, and then you can use the prettier ones if you choose to. I'm going to go ahead and, because there's just a small little amount, I'm just going to go ahead and cut these up small, and then I'm going to throw them in the pot, and I'll show you what size I'm going to cut them with. Here's the size of them. As you can see, I went ahead and I took the core out of that tomato. That's just not anything that's really going to be something that you want to eat. So go ahead and just discard that. Chickens are going to love that later on. And I've got these cut pretty small. Again, just kind of coarse chopped it. They are going to cook down, so they will make even smaller. If you prefer your salsa to be more smooth than chunky, you can go ahead and chop these even further. You can go ahead and kind of use a potato masher and just kind of, once they get cooked down, just to make those into smaller pieces. Or if you have like a blender, you can also do that as well. I prefer my salsa to be chunky, so I'm going to use them about this size. They'll get a little bit smaller once I cook them down. Alright, for the onions, I chopped them way smaller than I did the tomatoes. As you can see, they're pretty small. I might actually chop these up just a little bit smaller. I don't have a lot of onions to add to this recipe, so I want to make sure that the pieces are small enough that it does kind of disperse completely throughout. Some of the recipes will call for a lot of onions, some of them will call for a little bit. Just double check your recipe as it calls for, because if there's too many onions in there, it might call for, instead of water bath canning, you might have to pressure can it because it does affect the pH level. You can also use onion powder if you choose to. Onion powder is just dehydrated onions and just literally ground up and powderized. Again, just make sure that you are checking your recipe as far as how much that you need to add, to make sure that you don't need to add anything different or cook it differently. Just again, make sure that you can it safely. And here are the peppers. As you can see, again, I cut them in pretty small little pieces. I don't have any jalapenos this go around. They just were not quite ripe enough. For whenever you're doing your peppers, especially for the spicier ones like habaneros, serranos, jalapenos, you can either cut them and take the seeds and the ribs out if you don't want it overly spicy, or you can leave them in. For the hot peppers, the seeds and that white ribs that are inside those peppers right there, that is where your heat is. So if you don't like spicy food, go ahead and take those out or use a less spicier variety. What was ready here, I have some green peppers and I have some, I think they're pronounced shishitos. They are a Japanese type pepper. They can either be hot or they can be mild. There's that pepper kind of goes either way depending on the growing condition. These ones right here are pretty mild, so it's not going to add a lot of heat to this. Alright, and here is the garlic. I only used 2 cloves on this. The recipe called for 3, but I don't have as many tomatoes and peppers as it called for. Again, I cut this pretty small because again, I don't want to have I love garlic, but I don't want to take a huge bite of nothing but garlic in my salsa. So I'm going to go ahead and add this in. I'm going to go ahead and put this on the stove so we can go ahead and cook down a little bit, kind of blend all those flavors together, and then add in the little bit of spices and vinegar that we need to make this salsa. Here's the salsa on the stove. I'm going to go ahead and cook this for probably about another 15 minutes or so, just so everything kind of breaks down and all the flavors meld together. I'm getting ready to add the vinegar and that little bit of lime juice. Again, whatever recipe that you're calling for, just make sure that you follow it to a T just to make sure it comes out flavor-wise, and then just for safety. While we're waiting on everything else to kind of heat up and do its thing, I've got the rings and the lids here in some water. I went ahead and I cleaned those off. Again, with canning, I cannot stress the importance of make sure everything is clean and sanitary. And I'm going to go ahead and put this on the stove. I want the water to be warm here, but not boiling. They changed the requirements, the manufacturers did a couple years ago, so as long as the rings are warm and the canning lids are warm, you're good to go. You no longer have to boil them. Alright, so here's the stove. For any of those who have canned before, you know that it's kind of like this fine dance as far as timing and getting everything done and the cleanup process. So my water bath canner, the water is boiling right now. The salsa, you can see it's been cooked down a little bit. If you want a little bit thicker salsa, you can go ahead and cook it down a little bit more. And then I've got my lids and my rings in the back just kind of simmering in some warm water. I'm getting ready to fill them up. I just took my cans out of the oven so they are nice and sanitized. I've got this awesome funnel right here which slides right inside there. That way I'm kind of limiting how much of a mess that I'm going to make over here. And once I get everything filled up, we're going to go ahead and we're going to clean off the tops. Again, we want to make sure that those lids fit nicely. Alright, so I'm filling up these jars. Check the recipe. It'll let you know how much headspace that you're going to need for it. Headspace is kind of like what, it'll give it some expansion so when it's cooking, it won't boil over on you. If I remember correctly on this one, I want to say it's going to be about 1/4 inch, but I'm going to double check. And you can see, it's probably about 1/4 inch there. I'm going to double check just to make sure. They do make these little guides that you can double check on it, just to make sure you get the right size of it. So I'm going to go ahead and fill up all the rest of these and check the headspace, and we'll go on to the next step. You can see I've got all these filled up. This recipe only made about 7 of these pint jars. I always make sure that I have extra jars that are clean and sanitized because sometimes what they'll call for, they'll say it'll make 7 and it ends up making like 8 or so. That way there's not a mad rush at the end to try to get everything cleaned up and sterilized. I'm going to go ahead and wipe down all these tops. One of the reasons is you want to make sure that there's no food on top of it, so that way when we seal it, it will have a nice clean seal. Wish you guys could smell this. It smells so good. And once you go to making your own salsa and eating it, all the store-bought brands are going to be very, very disappointing too. Nothing better than making something yourself. The flavor is just that much better. Now I've got all these top parts of the jars nice and clean. I'm going to go ahead and apply the rings and the lid. This thing right here has a little magnet on the end. It's just a way that you can pick up the lids without touching your fingers on it. It's just a good way for not having to cross-contaminate. And I'll usually just drop it in there. I've got my lid, I've got my ring. The most important part of this for it is going to be that you want to just finger tightening it. If you were to over tighten, what happens is all the air that's in there, it cannot get out. So it's not going to go ahead and seal properly. Or when it does, this is actually going to buckle and kind of pops right up, or it'll crease in that corner. And then you're either going to have to reprocess it, or you're just gonna have to use it within like a week or so because it did not seal the proper way. The rings that you use, these are only pretty much just for the canning process. Once they come out of the canner and they have sealed or pinged, which is that noise of it go ahead and creating a seal, you can go ahead and pull them off. So these rings are actually going to be reusable, where the lids are not. There are a couple brands out there where you can reuse the lids, but you have to make sure that you get those specifically. It is not recommended to reuse non-reusable canning lids. Some people say that they can, and they have, and it's worked great. I would highly not recommend it. As you see, the water bath part is nice and boiling. And then we've got these here. These are extremely hot. Main part is because I just put boiling salsa in there. So we're going to use these tongs to go ahead and drop them in there carefully. When I mean drop, I mean place. Do not drop them because they will break. And this particular water bath canner can fit, I want to say it's going to be 8 or 9 of these, and then 7 of the larger quart. So we're going to go ahead and place those in there. And the first one or two, you're going to see that the water is above it. Once we put the rest of them in there, the displacement will go ahead and cover all of them the way that they should be. You can see that the water is above the top of the lids, and it is boiling. Whenever you are starting your cooking times, that time starts from when the water is boiling. This recipe calls for 15 minutes. Because we are high altitude, we're going to have to process that longer. So the process time on this particular one is going to be 25 minutes. Check your local extension. There's some places online that you can double check your cooking times and how much extra you're going to have to do for higher elevation. Here is that quick reference chart. So we are roughly 3,600 feet. So again, here's where it shows that our increased processing time is going to be 10 minutes. So here they are, the 25 minutes has passed. Getting ready to go ahead and pull them out of the canner. And because these jars are so hot, I'm going to sit them on my cutting board just to make sure that I don't do any damage to the jars or to my countertop. And you can see, if you look up close, can't tell if you tell, you can see that they're kind of still boiling inside of there. So they are pretty warm. And when you pull them out, you'll start hear pinging. Sometimes it's within just a few seconds you'll hear the pinging. Sometimes it might take up to 24 hours for them to fully seal. So we will check these periodically just to make sure that the jars have sealed correctly. Right, here they are. And you'll notice on these that there is some water on the bottom where more of the solids are up top. That is perfectly normal. Tomatoes are full of water, and that's just kind of the way that they settle. You see this one, you can see where it's still popped up. It has not sealed yet. But the one right next to it, I don't know if you can tell on the camera, but it has already kind of pulled down a little bit. So that one has already sealed, and that one has already sealed. And I don't know if you guys caught that. That is that pinging noise of when they do pull the seal for it. Alright guys, I hope you really enjoyed watching this video. If there's any other videos that you want me to work on making, just let me know. If you have any comments, feel free to leave them in the section below, and feel free to please like and subscribe. If you guys have some great canning recipes, again, please link them in the comments below. I'm always up to trying different recipes. Thanks, and have a great day.